March is Women's History Month, a time to reflect on and celebrate women who have persevered, often against seemingly insurmountable odds, to achieve goals that affect real positive change in our communities, in our world. Conservation history, and indeed American history, provide readily available examples of early conservation pioneers and leaders, from John Muir to George Bird Grinnell to Theodore Roosevelt to Aldo Leopold. Inarguably, we owe these gentlemen, and the many others like them, these naturalists, sportsmen, and scholars, a debt of gratitude. One cannot help but wonder, however, when scanning the popularly iterated history, where were the women? Were women less concerned with the natural world, less enthralled by the outdoors, less obligated or compelled to care about wildlife and wild places? Did the early days of North American conservation belong to men alone? Of course not. Gifford Pinchot, the first head of the U.S. Forest Service, published a book in 1910, The Fight for Conservation. In it, he praised the women of the Progressive Era, his female contemporaries, for their substantial contributions to conservation in America. Keep in mind that American women did not receive the right to vote until ratification in 1920. Who were these bold women who, in the name of conservation, dared to step out ahead of the still distant concept of gender equality, defying traditions, speaking out, and rallying support for preservation of the American landscape? By the late 1800s, fashionable North American women began wearing hats decorated with feathers, wings, and even whole taxidermied birds. Plume hunters killed and skinned mature birds numbering in the hundreds of thousands, while orphaned young were left to starve or become prey. By 1886, millions of North American birds were being slaughtered to supply the milliner's or hatmaker's trade. Harriet Lawrence Hemingway and her cousin Mina Hall, both Boston socialites, saw an opportunity for action. They believed that the birds had more value alive in a field and thus began a revolt, boycotting the bird feather trade. Other women followed, and this helped prompt the formation of the National Audubon Society and the eventual passage of the Weeks-McLean Act, later replaced by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Rosalie Barrow Edge was born into New York City's high society in 1877 and became active in the women's suffrage movement. In the 1920s, she developed an interest in birdwatching in Central Park, which deepened her appreciation for wildlife and the environment. She became a conservation activist upon hearing of the killing of 70,000 bald eagles in Alaska, which occurred without intervention from any of the environmental organizations that existed at the time. In 1929, she founded the Emergency Conservation Committee to expose the shortcomings of the conservation establishment. In 1934, she founded and funded the first nature preserve for birds of prey at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in the Appalachian Mountains. In 1948, the New Yorker called her the most honest, unselfish, indomitable hellcat in the history of conservation. Margaret Marty Murie has been referred to as the grandmother of conservation. Murie, a naturalist and author born in 1902, moved to Alaska when she was just 5 years old. She recognized from a young age the value of Alaska's overwhelmingly beautiful and complex environment, and as an adult sought to fiercely protect it. She was instrumental in the establishment and expansion of Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. In 1964, she stood beside President Lyndon B. Johnson as he signed the Wilderness Act, and her testimony before Congress in 1980 helped ensure the protection of some of the most important wilderness areas left in North America through the passage of Alaska's National Interest Lands Conservation Act. At the age of 100, the National Wildlife Federation presented her with its highest honor, the Conservation Achievement Award. One must wonder what wisdom she would impart today in the debate surrounding the proposed Pebble Mine. Celia Hunter, a member of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, WASP, first became interested in Alaska during World War II In 1947, when the U.S. ferrying service refused to let any woman fly as far as Alaska, she borrowed a plane and went anyway. Hunter was inspired by Alaska and fought alongside Muir, lobbying to safeguard the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. She went on to become the first female president of a national conservation organization, the Wilderness Society. Hunter played a major role in passing legislation to protect over 100 million Alaskan acres, and on her dying day wrote a letter to Congress hoping to protect the Arctic refuge from drilling. Rachel Carson is widely considered to be the founder of the modern environmental movement. A marine biologist and author, Carson also studied zoology and genetics and was employed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1943. In mid-1945, she became aware of the pesticide DDT. This would prove a turning point in her life and career, and by the late 1950s, she had become focused on alerting the public to the dangers of indiscriminate pesticide use, as well as fallout from nuclear testing. In 1962, she published Silent Spring, which encompassed her conservation message and raised significant public health concerns. The book would gain enough influence to spur new regulations and important changes in the practices of the chemical, agriculture, and nuclear industries. All this despite the fact that corporate leaders attempted to discredit Carson's findings on the basis of her gender. DDT was eventually banned, saving numerous bird species from almost certain extinction. Carson's work was to have widespread significance and inspired grassroots movements that led to the development of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Even today, it is said that EPA calls itself the extended shadow of Rachel Carson. These are just a few examples of the inspirational women who have brought new ideas and philosophies to the conservation movement. They contributed to science, formed and led organizations, and fought tirelessly to protect and sustain wildlife in wild places. They overcame many obstacles, achieved greatness, and most importantly, they made a real difference in conservation. Their legacy needs to be celebrated and remembered. And there's more to come. According to a recent survey by the National Sporting Goods Association, women are now the fastest-growing hunting segment in American society, and there has been an exponential increase in female hunters over the last 5 years. The potential for female leadership and participation in conservation amongst women who hunt is therefore now immense and growing. This will undoubtedly lead to new conversations within the hunting and conservation community, and hopefully broaden this dialogue within society at large.